Well, we are past Thanksgiving and well into the start of the holiday season, and I think that food is on a lot of our minds. Well, I have to say, Sam, food is always on my mind. It's and that was pre-COVID too, and now it just seems to be like I sort of feel like I base everything on the next meal. It's no longer a clock for me. It's not like what time is it? It's is it dinner time? Is it lunchtime? Am I the only one that's doing that, or is that like because I don't know if I need therapy. Sometimes I feel like I need therapy on certain things.
No, you are not alone. You are not alone. Americans love their food and beverage, and there's nothing wrong with that. We love to eat and drink, and it drives many of our life decisions.
Well, we're going to talk more about that, but you are listening to the Eye on Life podcast. It is go time, and today, if we don't make you hungry in today's show, we have failed. So, or I have failed at least. I'm sure Sam will make everyone hungry. I'm actually just hungry. Again, I'm trying to think of when my next meal is, when my last meal was. Again, that's how I sort of gauge everything these days.
Fair enough.
This is the Eye on Life podcast you're listening to at Eye on Life podcast. You can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Like us, share us, follow us. I also want to thank our show sponsor, Chris Bossert and Monica Perez Bossert. mustny.com, and as you know, Sam, we're and especially the industry that you cover, right? Hospitality, restaurants, so impacted by COVID. If you are going out and you are going to a restaurant that is, I know it's challenging to eat with a mask on. I'd like to see somebody try that. I think it would probably be entertaining. At least I've seen people like they cut some people have like cut open the mask so they can talk or feed themselves. But Chris and Monica Perez Bossert, mustny.com. They have amazing masks. And I've actually been talking to some people who, if you're looking for a gift, I don't know if you have kids or not. You do have kids. Are they in school?
4 and 2. And they might make an appearance. We might hear them in the background at some point.
That's real life right there. We love that.
That's
maybe
right.
We can find out what their favorite meal is.
That's right.
But the reason why I ask you about kids is because I know a lot of people that are actually going to mustny.com, and it's a great gift for teachers. A lot of they do all kind of like teacher decorations. So sponsor the show, mustny.com. If you're looking for something easy, you don't even have to go out to the store. You want to get something nice for your teacher, your principal, your neighbor. Great stocking stuffers, mustny.com. And I have to say, I know we're going to talk about a lot of different kinds of foods today. So Chris Bossert is a friend of mine from high school and the show sponsor. And I don't know if maybe he felt obligated because I've known him since nursery school to become a sponsor. But Chris, Chris is the deluxe. He's the deluxe meal of entrepreneurship, of COVID masks. He is the filet mignon. He is I love Big Macs. He is the Big Mac of, and I'm not just saying it. He knows I'm not just saying that, but he is a great guy and they do a great job. They're entrepreneurs. So mustny.com for the show sponsor. Thanks to them for that. I also want to shout out a couple of some new downloads this week. A lot of downloads. Have you ever been to Prosper, Texas?
No.
It's in the Dallas Metroplex. 24 new downloads from there. So it's either one person that loves me or maybe a variety of people that listen to the show. Thank you, Prosper, Texas. You're near Dallas. That's awesome. Albany, New York, also the capital of New York State. I'm from that area originally, so maybe some love from Albany. Appreciate that. And also Evanston, Illinois, which is where Northwestern is. That's not too far from. You're a Midwesterner, so you probably know that area a little.
Originally, bit. Yeah, sure. Mm-hmm.
So we are with Sam Oches.
Oches, that's right.
Oches, okay. And I imagine probably a lot of people mispronounce your name. I'm guessing
all the time. It helped with telemarketers growing up. It always helped us to know who was legit.
So what do people? So it's Oches, and if you look at it, Oches.
That's right. Yeah. So Oches is what everybody said. Yeah, I get Oaks a lot. I've gotten O'Shea, Ox. But it rhymes with focus. That's right.
O'Shea is the fancy version. I've actually got my last name is Boyer. I've been called Brian Boyer. So I guess
there you go. Yeah, the French version, I guess.
The French. Well, if you and I ever go into business, open up a French restaurant, and I'm happy to be the second name. It could be O'Shea and Boyer. That actually sounds pretty.
There we go. Rolls off the tongue.
That's not bad. So thanks so much for joining us, Sam, on the Eye on Life podcast. We've been talking for a long time about doing a show on food. And I know that you are the editorial director. You're with Food News Media.
That's right.
And you are based in Chapel Hill. North Carolina, which I've been down there. It's great down there. It's a great college town. I know you said you live in Durham, so you have that research triangle down there, right? It's like Durham,
That's
Raleigh, and that's a great area down there. Now I know you're an Ohio University guy.
Yes.
Do you get caught up? The Bobcats and Athens, Ohio. If you've never been to Athens, Ohio, it's actually it's an amazing college town. It really is.
Yeah.
Kind of in the middle of nowhere, but there's a ton to do there because it's Ohio University is a huge school and there's a lot going on. So I guess my question is, before we get into the food, do you get caught up in the whole Duke North Carolina rivalry? Are you thrust into that? Do you have to take a side? Do you stay neutral? How does that work for you?
Yeah, I stay pretty neutral. Having grown up in Ohio, I grew up in the shadow of Ohio State-Michigan rivalry. My mom's family all went to Michigan, but you don't live in Ohio and be a Michigan fan. It's just not really possible. I was pretty neutral on that rivalry for a long time as well. I was born and raised in Athens, where Ohio University is. So I was always a Bobcat fan, which means not very much because they don't really, they don't get the big stage in college sports. So anyway, yeah, when I got down here, I felt like I should take sides. My wife worked at Duke for several years. And so I told her, well, I guess I'll cheer for Duke in that case. And so I have, but honestly, I'm one of those terrible fans here where I'm like, I am happy when both of them win because it means that half of my coworkers are, going to be happy. So it's just, and it's a fun rivalry. And since I've lived here 12 years. And since then, UNC's won 2 titles and Duke has won 2 titles. So it's pretty cool to be able to live here and, be able to be a part of that. But I'm not like devastated when Duke loses or anything like that.
It's probably an easier way for you to keep friends because I imagine those on both sides, if you kind of remain Switzerland on it, it's probably a little bit easier for you, and you don't really have any skin in the game, so it's probably just as well.
And the other thing about it, too, is different than Ohio State, Michigan. Unless you live in Toledo, you're really not living in the middle of that rivalry. Whereas here, Durham and Chapel Hill are 8 miles apart. The universities are 8 miles apart. I live in Durham. I work in Chapel Hill. And I have that's very common here. You live in one, you work in the other. And so, it's, for that sake, it's a much more friendly rivalry than Ohio State, Michigan is legitimately scary at times. People genuinely threaten violence and things like that. Duke UNC, I don't think necessarily gets to that level, thankfully.
That's actually good. I'm actually surprised. I thought it seemed like maybe it's more fun. It appears as though there's some vitriol there and some anger towards each other, but it's all fun. It's all in fun. It's sports. Maybe the Michigan and Ohio State fans should get together and have some food together, right? Because I feel like food brings everyone together, which is interesting. And I want to ask you a question because
sure,
I have faced, and I'm going to ask your opinion on this.
Okay.
Because I don't know how to handle this situation, and I'm hoping that maybe you can offer me some insight if this has ever happened to you. So I like to go out. I love food, right? And I'm definitely not a food snob. But I know what I like. I mean, I lived in DC. I spent a lot of time in New York. I'm in Connecticut now. And so I feel like it's sort of subjective, right? Everybody likes what they like. And everybody, it's like political persuasions that you have. You are what you are, what movies you like or you don't like. But let me ask you this question because I've had this conversation and I don't have a very good poker face. Okay.
Okay.
There are people that I respect. There are people that I enjoy spending time with. But I've had conversations with people who I like, who I respect, who I enjoy being with. And we have a conversation about a restaurant. And they're saying to me, like, let's say there's a certain restaurant, right? Restaurant X. Oh, have you been there? And they're like, oh, yeah, I've been there before. That is the best restaurant I have ever been to. It's amazing. The appetizers were incredible. And I've been there before. And I'm thinking to myself, I had an awful meal there. It was terrible. And it's funny because obviously, people are very passionate about the food that they like. We're going to talk about fast food, right? I've seen people almost getting in fights over who has the best fries, right? So it's not a trivial thing to some people, but I find it very difficult to respect someone who loved a meal at a place that I went to and found it very, very average. I'm not saying I'm not be all end all. I am not a food critic and I don't pretend to be, but I have to fight through that. And they must see the look on my face when they're telling me how good the meal was. And I'm thinking, my God, did they really liked it that much? Have you ever been in that situation? And what's your reaction? How do you sort of, do you have a poker face? Do you call them out and say, I've been there, that place sucks? Like, how do you sort of play that?
When I was in college, I wanted to be a music critic. I thought that I would be a culture writer, music critic. And it didn't pan out because I wanted to ultimately have a full-time job in music criticism. Unfortunately, you can't really have that. Now, one thing I learned in that world too is that everybody has a different opinion. And I had learned over time that I could never take everybody else's opinions personally, because, when you're passionate about something, you want everybody else to love it. And as a music critic, like that's kind of what they're trying to do in many cases. And the world isn't like that. And for the better, we can't all be the same and like the same stuff. And so over time, and it's kind of like sports too, right? I mean, I grew up a big Cleveland sports fan. In 4 years, the Cavs versus the Warriors, it was like I wanted Warriors fans to suffer. Right. And after that run was done, LeBron was in LA, we had our title. I sort of stopped and I was like, you know what? Steph Curry's a pretty good dude. I don't know why I hate the Warriors. And it's just because you get in these situations where you want your side to be the right one. And you know what? Life is a lot better when you don't worry about that stuff. So as it relates to your question in food, everybody's palate is so different. And there are some restaurants that I think legitimately, not only is it not a great food, but it's like, you can not like a restaurant too, because maybe it's not a great mission. Maybe they're not great people or terrible service. There've been restaurants that I like the food and the people there are just not good people. So point being is that like, there's always gonna be lots of things that people like and don't like about a restaurant. And I've just come to realize that I'm never going to persuade anybody based on what my favorite is and what, or dissuade them based on what their favorite is.
That's, you're a better person than I am, because as a sports fan, I'm a New York Giants football fan. I can't stand the teams in the NFC East. I can't stand the fans. I want them to, I guarantee they have lousy taste in restaurants, whatever. I sort of say that half jokingly, but so I'm going to learn today from you to be a little bit more low-key. I just always find it funny, to your point though, about, palates, because you can literally talk to somebody who says that they've been to a place and it has the best steak that they've had. And you go there and I guess I feel like when people talk something up, your expectation becomes even greater. So I almost like to go to restaurants before I've even spoken to anyone, because I sort of feel like I want to go in there with a blank slate and not have any expectation, and then judge it based on how the meal actually is versus how it is compared to how somebody else said it was. Right. So it is interesting. Food's very interesting. Food brings us together. Drinks, beverages, it all brings us together. You have been in this industry a lot. You write about it on a daily basis. I know you've written a lot of articles. I know you do a lot on fast food. You do a lot on, some of the sit-down restaurants as well. I know you've also won a lot of awards for your writing, so congratulations. Obviously, you've done a lot of extensive work, and it's well read, it's widely read, and it's very well respected. So I want to really thank you for being on the show with us today. Sure. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Food News Network and your role there. How did you get into this field? I mean, it seems like a fairly easy answer, right? I like to write and I like food, right? But how did you, you said music. How did you get into this particular role? And tell us a little, I know you have a couple of publications that you work for there. Tell us a little bit about those, just a level set before we get started.
Sure. Yeah. So I, when I was in college, like I said, I wanted to be a music critic, a music journalist. And when I was a junior in college, I started to realize that was probably not going to lead to a full-time job out of college. At the time, I had a girlfriend who is now my wife. I wanted to be able to, propose and have an income and all that. And so my advisor at the time, my junior year of college, she said, well, why don't you look at business journalism? Because this was also leading into getting toward the recession. Journalism jobs were starting to look pretty shaky. And she was like, business journalism is about the safest as it comes for journalism jobs, because you're in writing about industry, depending on the industry, those industries support those jobs in journalism. And it wasn't like consumer publications at the time, which were already getting swept up into, failing because of the internet and all that. B2B publications, trade publications were certainly at the time we're doing pretty healthy. So I pivoted. I took an internship at an architecture trade mag that was based in Chicago. And then when I graduated from college, I was looking for anything I could find. I mean, at the time it was full blown recession. By that point, it was 2009. And I got really, really, really lucky. And QSR magazine was at the time hiring for an associate editor. And my experience having done an internship at a business publication made me an attractive candidate. And so got the job, moved down a week after graduating, became associate editor of QSR. QSR stands for quick service restaurants. That is a fancy term for fast food. So the primary audience of QSR is fast food executives and franchisees. As a trade magazine for the fast food industry, and fast casual, which would we can get into, but that's sort of, you know, Chipotle, Panera, more premium style fast food. And then I'm very fortunate to just have opportunities come my way while with the company. Became managing editor, then editor of QSR, and now I'm editorial director of Food News Media, which encompasses QSR and our sister publication, FSR. FSR stands for Full Service Restaurants, which is basically any restaurant with table service.
So it is still, you know, everybody, we've talked a lot on the show about being politically correct. We're still allowed to say fast food, right? We won't get in trouble for saying fast food. Now, let me ask you, but to your point about your audience. So you talk about the executives, you know, McDonald's and Burger King and all these fast food chains that are huge, right? Do the people that work at these, is it one of those things where if you say fast food to somebody who works at one of these companies, they'll correct you, or is it still acceptable? Is that still a buzzword? QSR seems a little formal.
Yeah, it's pretty acceptable. Sure. I think fast food broadly among, you know, the general populace is seen as this sort of dirty word, like, oh, it's just fast food. You know, that's to suggest something might be less quality. I don't think the industry necessarily sees it that way. I mean, you know, QSR itself is the more popular term. They would say the QSR industry. That's why our magazine got the name. It's a very popular acronym in the industry. You know, anymore fast casual is basically, I would say, any restaurant, any counter service restaurant that's sprung up in the last really 15 to 20 years is actually more of what we would call fast casual, in that they have higher quality food, higher quality experience in the restaurant. And so fast food, QSR as we know it, is all of those big chains that you all know, you know, your McDonald's, Burger King, Subway, Wendy's, et cetera. And so yeah, it's not necessarily a term that I think you get frowned upon or corrected on in the industry at all, but it's not used very much because I think people, you know, a franchisee for one of those major chains is not going to see their product certainly as lesser quality. And, you know, I don't think they love being used as some sort of slang, negative, derogatory term toward them. But I don't think they necessarily think that they avoid that term just because they don't want that to you know, connote bad food or something.
I might try to impress the people that I hang out with and say, let's go out for some QSR tonight and see what they say. I bet they'll probably have no idea.
There you go. Yeah, there you go.
If they read your publication and just and I'm going to ask you this probably a couple times, but where if people want to find more information on you guys, where can they go?
Sure, yeah, QSRmagazine.com for the QSR content and FSRmagazine.com for all the FSR content there.
So you're making a living out of this, obviously, and I have to ask you as far as food goes and writing about food. And I guess first I have to ask you before I get to the next question, I do want to ask you a little bit of a personal question. So you said your girlfriend, who's now your wife. Now, I imagine your first date, and if it was, it's okay, was probably not McDonald's. Is that accurate? It was. That's
accurate. Yeah, it was a coffee shop. A friend of mine owns a coffee shop there in Athens called Donkey Coffee. Big fan of that. If you're ever in Athens, go to Donkey Coffee.
Donkey Coffee. That's good to know. Do you think that she still would have married you had you taken her to a fast food restaurant on your first date? Or
well, you know, if we're talking personal questions now, I can tell you a personal story, which is that when I was in college, I'm a musician, so I'm a drummer, and in college I was in some bands, and I had a band in college called Bananarchy. We played punk rock and wore banana costumes. And when we first started dating, my now wife came to a Bananarchy concert and left halfway through. And I was like, well, I guess that's the end of that. She doesn't like me anymore. And sure enough, I don't think she really loved the banana part of it, but you know, hey, it didn't drive her away. So I think we're all right.
You must have taken her to a really nice restaurant after that one. And I like the idea of bananas as your theme because, you know, the whole food theme, and it's like you guys were almost ahead of your time. You know, a lot of Kiss, right? You know, they dressed up, they had their makeup, Slipknot. You guys are bananas.
Yeah,
I
We
think that's
always
actually
said
awesome.
we would be big in Japan, but we never got that far. We played about 10 shows, and then I think some of the guys got a little bit bored with it, so we
Well, it
didn't keep
happens.
going.
That's right. So you moved. Okay. So music and food. That's a great combination, right?
Yeah.
And music's another thing. We've done shows on music. It brings us together. Food really does bring us together. Um, Food is, and as I said before, and I said it sort of half joking, but it really is true. We're meals dictate a lot of what we do, right? There's dinner time, right? The kids have to eat at this time, or I'm gonna have a lunch meeting, or I have to get there early. I hope they have breakfast or coffee or whatever. So food is. I feel like food is part of literally almost everything that we do. Even I go for a jog, right? I'm going for a jog. Why am I going for a jog? Well, to burn off what I ate earlier, right? Or to burn off what I'm going to eat later. But I feel like almost more so now, right, during COVID, when there's just not as much going on, food has become that much more important. But I guess I want to ask you, and you can relate it to COVID, or you can just sort of in general. But
Sure.
like, why is food so important? We have parties are centered around food, right? Entertainment is centered around food. People go out to eat before they go to a movie or a theater or something like that, right? Sporting events, the baseball games are known for hot dogs, right? So in your, you've been doing this. So as far as the inside, I can give my viewpoint on that, but from from an insider, why is food so important to people? The way we socialize, the way we live, the culture. Talk a little bit about that if you could.
Yeah, I mean, food is emotional. I think is how I see it. Is you have emotions tied up in food because you have memories tied up in food. It's nostalgic, but it also it brings you to the table, right? It brings you into groups to have conversation, and because there are these deep emotions connected to food, it drives so many of the decisions that we make. So, I didn't go home for Thanksgiving. I'm not going home for Christmas. And two of the big things that I'm going to miss about that are the traditional meals that we have with my parents. Right. And that's not necessarily because I love that kind of food as much as it is because of the nostalgia of all the past memories that I have of having that food in the past. So, this is what restaurants thrive off of. They're creating an experience that's an emotional experience, that you have these feelings of being comfortable and being happy and sharing laughter. And then when you come back, you're going to remember those feelings. Your favorite restaurants, often it's not about the food. It's about how they made you feel. Now, the food has a big role in that, but that has to do with the service. It has to do with the ambiance. And so, food is this great way to bring people together. And, we might disagree on our favorite sports teams or politics or whatever, but if you come around the table and have a great pizza or Chinese or whatever it is, you can find some commonality there. And so that's why I think food is such a, last 20 years, we've been immersed in this quote unquote foodie movement, and food chefs are rock stars and all that. And it's, I think, a big, underlying factor there. The foundation for why that is because it's something that unifies us, and it's something we can all get behind, and it's a universal experience. Everybody eats, right? So I think that's a long-winded way to answer your question, but I think ultimately emotions are sort of the core of it.
Well, now you just said something really interesting, I thought, because, and this is just me, I'd be curious to know what your thoughts are and how other people kind of are about this. But you just said that, and I agree. Like when you go to a restaurant, it's about the full experience. It's not just about the food. It's about the server. The server can play a role. The server can make or break your meal. The ambiance, sometimes people like al fresco, right? They like that. I love sitting outside to eat. For me personally, it's about the food. I love hole in the walls, places like that. But is it legitimate that somebody could actually go to a restaurant where the food is mediocre, but everything else is so amazing that the food almost tastes better to them, and that they actually would go back? Or is it? I can't see somebody going back to a restaurant if they don't like the food. But you're saying that it could be something other than the food that entices them to go back potentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, for starters, proximity, right? If it's something that you could walk to, that adds to the experience, or if it's just a quick drive, with a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, proximity was everything to my wife and I before the pandemic in terms of where we were going to eat, because it was all a matter of time. That's a start. But then, of course, how comfortable is it? Are there TVs? Can I go watch a football game? Is there a bar? Is the music loud? Can I hear the people I'm with? Are the servers nice? Well, all of that stuff goes into it. I mean, there's so much. And so like I said, I mean, I've had a restaurant where there's a pizza place near where I live that I thought had some of the best pizza in town. And I stopped going there because I never had an experience in which the servers were not just really rude. And it was clear to me that there was a leadership issue at that restaurant. They were not getting trained on how to be nice employees. And it made me feel like, well, if you're not going to take the time to train your employees to be nice, it doesn't matter how much I like this pizza. That's a big part of why I want to go out to eat, because I want to feel like I'm being respected and treated well. And so all these factors play into that. And so in the restaurant industry, that's why we have so much to cover as part of restaurants. It's not just here's how to make your food good. In fact, for QSR, we don't write about food all that much. We don't write about new recipes as much as we write about like, here's how to make it happen. Here's how to create an experience. Here's what's trendy in operations and service and all that stuff. Cause that all plays almost a bigger role. Your mind is often set when you want to eat. If you want to eat, you're like, I'm craving wings. Okay. Well, right off the bat, you have a small group of, restaurants that you're going to choose from because you want wings. Well, what's the place that you've had the best wings at? What are the places you can afford, or what most importantly is closest to you? And so, that's people will choose restaurants for a number of different factors, but I guess the point is that they're not necessarily going to be like, that place 30 minutes from my house across town has the best wings, therefore I'm only going to go get wings from there. Because no, of course not. They're going to get wings from somewhere that's a balancing of the price, the proximity, and the flavor. And so all of those factors play a role in your restaurant experience.
That's really, I agree. It's really interesting that you say that, because for me personally, I feel like I should not have to drive more than 10 minutes for a good pizza. I just feel like I shouldn't have to. Yeah. And the funny thing is, but I have done that because I don't know if you've been to Connecticut or Connecticut well, but Connecticut's known for pizza, especially New Haven. And so I have actually driven down to New Haven because they have some amazing pizza down there. It's considered one of the pizza capitals of the world, I think, New Haven. But
I've heard that, yeah.
So it actually is worth. I'm about 40 minutes from there. That's totally worth it. But when you talk about it, it's really interesting because you're saying that it sounded like what you're saying is that the pizza at that place was good, but the service was so bad, or the people were so nasty that you wouldn't even go back. And I'm wondering, like, what have you seen as far as, and I guess this is personal and what you've seen, but what's the threshold? Because for me, if the pizza's amazing, I can deal with a little attitude. You know what I mean? So there are restaurants where I've gone and like the food is so good that I'm like, I don't care if the server curses at me. I'm going back because it's so amazing. I'm exaggerating a little bit, but is there a threshold? Like, I mean, is it one of those things where the better the food is, maybe they feel like they don't have to train their employees as much, or how does that?
Well, is it going to affect those emotions? Is it going to make you angry? Is it going to disappoint you? Is it going to make your day sour? I think that's kind of the threshold. I would say it's sort of a flip side of all this that I've sort of rolled my eyes about for the trends in the restaurant industry the last 10 years is this idea of standing in line for hours for a certain kind of food. This was happening in, you remember the Cronut of 5-6 years ago. Shortly after that, I remember David Chang opened up Fuku in New York, and it was this chicken sandwich, fast casual. And I was in New York, and I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go stand in line for Fuku and see how this goes. I stood in line for 45 minutes, and I got the sandwich, and it was good. I would never do it again. It's not, and that's not a knock on that sandwich. That's that there are a lot of good chicken sandwiches out there. And in my opinion, nothing is worth standing in a line for 45 minutes for. That's maybe not a popular food opinion because there's some people who are really passionate about their food choices and they're going to do whatever it takes. And I've heard a lot of stories of people who drive across a good big chunk of the country solely for a certain kind of food. That people will do that. And I don't hold that against them. I mean, if that's a particular thing you want to do, then that's great. Generally speaking, though, to your point, there's going to be great food very close to you almost no matter where you are. You can find really great food. So you don't necessarily need to go wait in line for 45 minutes for a chicken sandwich. If the chicken sandwich place a couple blocks away has no line. That's sort of my feeling. So I guess the threshold is always what does that make you do emotionally? If I'm standing in a line, I'm getting impatient, I'm bored, I'm looking at my phone too much, or I got something I got to go do. So, for me, those are the things that I'm balancing. But if that pizza is going to make, and that chicken sandwich, whatever it is, if it's going to make you genuinely happier, it's going to make your day better, then fine. Hey, go for it.
I'm actually so happy that you brought that up. The whole idea of waiting.
Mm-hmm.
And what I do sometimes on the show is I have some rants that I go on the show, and they're usually, I try not to, it's going to sound judgmental. First off, I love the people that go do that. I think there are people that travel, they go, hours, right? Days. I went to school out in Fredonia, New York, and a lot of my friends were from Rochester, New York. Mm-hmm. And they had Nick Tahoe's, which was a place out there it was a garbage. They had something called a garbage plate. I just lost you. I see your name.
Yeah, my audio is here. I think my camera quit. It's been doing that lately. I apologize.
No worries. We can always edit that out. But nonetheless, the people who are listening can at least hear us. That's fine.
Yeah.
And there were times where we would jump in the car and drive 2 hours to get the garbage plate, which was it was like a greasy hamburger with beans and onions and macaroni salad, and it's completely not worth 2 hours of drive, but it was part of the experience. It was part of the fun. But I am with you, okay? And I think it's awesome when people do that. I am not waiting more than 10 minutes for something. To your point, if I'm sitting in a line for an hour, 45 minutes, each minute that goes by for me is another minute of my expectation growing for whatever I'm about to eat. If I'm waiting for, say, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I sort of feel like if I'm waiting in line I'm going to actually, for me, and I'm very impatient. I'm a very impatient person, right? If it's more than a half an hour, it better be one of the best things I've ever tasted.
Yeah. Because
I can get something for over 5 minutes that's going to be probably just as satisfying to me. Mm-hmm. And I'm waiting 5 minutes for it. I don't know what your thoughts are. It sounds like that sandwich that you had was not the best thing you've ever had.
No, I mean, well, look, it was a really good chicken sandwich. And I'll tell you too, I don't think my camera is going to turn back on. So I hope your audience doesn't want to look at me from here on out.
No worries. They unfortunately now they have to look at me more, but that's okay.
They just have to look at you the whole time. That's right. At least they can hear me. So look, I mean, it's so hard to say because I mean, it was a really good sandwich, sure. But again, I just don't think when it comes to food for me, again, this is such a universal thing. Everybody eats. There's food everywhere. Look, for perspective, before the pandemic, there were 1 million restaurants in the United States. That's a restaurant. I mean, restaurants are everywhere. And, most of them, I think, serve at least good food, if not very great food. There's not a ton of restaurants out there that serve really crappy food because guess what? They're going to go out of business. They're, and of course, opinions are different as to what's crappy and what's good. But I guess the point is that, especially if you're in New York City, a chicken sandwich is not going to be hard to find. You throw a stone, you hit a chicken sandwich restaurant, right? And so for that sake, it's like, why do you wait? Now, people wait so they can post to social media. They can tell their friends they went to that restaurant, that they had that experience. And I get that. Look, I've been guilty of posting pictures of my food on my social media before. I like being able to brag that I went to so-and-so restaurant. But at the same time, I guess what's the trade-off? Is it worth your time? Is it worth the extra money? You just have to weigh that. For some people, it's going to be, the trade-off's going to be fine. And for some people, like me, it's usually not.
Well, you bring up great points. And I sometimes I told you before we started the show that sometimes we have a part one and a part two. And I'm just, I know you have to get going in a little bit here. So we're going to start going down, but can we get you on next week again? I'd love to have you on because there are a bunch of questions.
Sure. Yeah.
Which I really appreciate your time. We're with Same Oches, who is the editorial director at Food News Media. And we're not going to get to everything today because when it comes to food, we could probably have several months of conversation. But you brought up a really good point that I want to ask you about, because the restaurant business just seems to be, and when I say, I want to be very clear when I say that, the restaurants, a lot of people might not necessarily look at it as a business, right? You're going out for dinner, you're not necessarily thinking about that. But there's a lot to it, right? There's the operations, there's making sure you have the food, there's the customer service piece, there's the quality control piece, there's the marketing piece, there's a lot to it, right? There's a lot to running a restaurant.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But let me ask you this question, because it seems like a very, very cutthroat industry. There are a
Yes.
lot of very good restaurants, right, that go out of business. They're not necessarily going out of business because they're not good. They're very good. So to me, that I find that to be intriguing, because if they're good, I would think that would sustain them for a while, but that's not always the case. So how do restaurants sustain themselves? I see businesses. I'm in West Hartford, Connecticut here, and there are a ton of restaurants in the center of our town here. And some of them have been there for years, but a lot of them, it's a revolving door in certain spots. Is it, Sam, is it location? Is it, maybe the wrong market sometimes? Is it the food's not good, the customer, what causes restaurants to go out of business? And on the other token, on the other side of it, how does a restaurant last for 20, 30 years? Is it a science?
Yeah, it's very much a variety of factors, right? I mean, I guess the first thing I'll say is restaurants are usually a labor of love. People get into the restaurant industry. Most people don't get into the restaurant industry because they see it as a good business proposition. Let's just say that. They are famously low profit margin, famously not big money makers. You're not going to go become a millionaire by opening a restaurant. You might become a millionaire by opening a chain of restaurants, but to get to that point of opening a chain of restaurants from one restaurant is phenomenally hard. And so one restaurant's hard enough. Now, look, there are statistics out there, and I'll tell you some of the popular statistics that tend to get quoted. I can't give you the exact numbers. I think it changes, and certainly is going to be affected by COVID. But the popular number is that something like 60% of restaurants fail in their first 2 years. And that's because it's really, really hard. So let's say you have this dream to open a restaurant because you have the best pizza recipe. Well, guess what? There's 100 other pizza restaurants in town, and all of your potential customers already have their favorite pizza place. And so how do you get their attention? Location, like you said, Brian, is a big piece of it. Absolutely. You sort of have to get that A+ location. If you're going to get the corner of Main and Main, you're set up for better success than if you were out behind a strip mall, on the corner of at the edge of town or something like that. But although, and we can get into this now or on our next conversation, that's starting to change with delivery. But the point is, you can get a great location. It can give you a leg up, but then you have to deal with, your labor, your workforce. Most restaurants, you're hiring entry-level employees. So training them, getting them to do high quality, consistent service, that's hard. You could have a great product people love, but again, going back to my pizza experience, if your workers blow it, they're not good at their job, well, that's going to stack the deck against you. And the fact is that turnover in restaurants is, on average, certainly in QSR, on average, your turnover is always over 100%, which means you turn over all of your workers on average every year, because it's a very fluid industry for workforce, right? So that's a big factor. Food cost is a big factor, right? Just balancing your P&L is always going to be a big deal. And I know there have been really great restaurant concepts I've watched in my 12 years of doing this that have a great concept, seemingly have everything going for them, the momentum, the good press, and they fail. And it's usually because if you open their books, they're a mess. Right. So it's so many different things. But I think if you're looking at it just from the consumer's standpoint, getting the attention of your local customers is really hard. And especially today in this world where so much of the industry is virtual, so much of your marketing's on social media, so many of your customers are engaging with you through the DoorDash app or whatever it might be. Your competition is virtually limitless, because it's every restaurant within whatever 50 mile, whatever it is, radius. And so, broadly speaking, I think the restaurants that succeed the most, it's some combination of having a good product, having good management, good business minds behind the books that are making sure everything's in line, creating a good experience. And then ultimately it's having like good word of mouth, having your customers have a good experience and then go back and then tell their neighbors and their friends, you need to go to that place. And so that's probably the science of it, of anything, but it's so unpredictable in such a volatile industry. And that's not even considering a global pandemic.
Well, that adds a little bit of a challenge, and I've always thought this might be restaurant / business 101, but it's always been kind of like my dream to like open a restaurant, not as like something that to build my livelihood off of, just because of the volatility around it, and the unpredictability of it. But if I was like making millions of dollars, I always thought it'd be fun to like open a restaurant and just kind of be there and just, schmoozing with the customers and whatnot. But I've always kind of thought
Everybody has that idea. Everybody loves that
it'd
idea,
be fun,
right?
right? Sit at the bar and
At
hang out
some
and have a
point.
bourbon.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I guess my question, it seems like you should have somebody that focuses on the food, and then you should have somebody that focuses on the business. I feel like you almost have to have two, and maybe it's more than just two people, but I sort of feel like if I ever opened up the business, I'd be fine to be the owner, and then I would have the chef and all the food people on not one side, but we'd all be together, and then the person with the operations and making sure the books were all in order and that we're actually making some money off of it. Is that kind of is there a model? I mean, obviously there's not necessarily one model, because if there was a model that worked, everybody would use it. But do most restaurants have that business side and then kind of the food side, or does it overlap? How does that work?
It's almost always going to be divided. I mean, chefs are almost sort of famously bad business people, right? I mean, they're creative people. They are paying attention to many different factors than a business person might, a restaurant owner. And that's why you see people out there. You see there are chefs and there are restaurateurs. I think one good example of this is like Danny Meyer. So Danny Meyer in New York, of course, in my world, he's known for Shake Shack, but he created this restaurant empire in New York. And, he's not a chef really. Like, I mean, I don't remember if in his early days he ever was. Tom Colicchio and he were business partners. Tom Colicchio was this great chef. Danny Meyer's a restaurateur. He's really more the brains, I think, behind the scenes. And I think that's going to be a fairly common thing in the restaurant industry. There's some exceptions to that rule. Some chefs, of course, are good business people. Certainly if you look at, chains, you're going to see your traditional CEO, COO, CMO, and then you're going to usually have an executive chef or somebody who's in charge of R&D. But the bigger your system of restaurants get, the bigger your chain gets, honestly, the less the culinary is a piece of it. At that point, you're dealing with systems, you're dealing with scale. You're not as much dealing with the menu, because most restaurants are not going to want to tinker with their menu too much, because that's a headache. I mean, changing your menu, having to find other, food sources and ingredients, and changes your costs, and, you're constantly developing. There's a whole thing about it. They have most chains will have a schedule of product rollouts so that's predictable. They can follow that. They can have that in their marketing. You can roll out the McRib or whatever it is and get people to come in your restaurant. But by and large, they don't tinker with the menu too much, because that's a headache. So you don't necessarily need a chef on hand who's constantly creating. Now, if you're in a full service restaurant or a fine dining or whatever, it's kind of what you hang your hat on. If you have daily specials, you need to place priority on those people. So it definitely just depends on the kind of restaurant that you have.
We're going to wrap up. I do want to ask you one more question, and I'm glad we decided to do two parts here, because, and this is a testament to you and your knowledge and here, but we've barely got anything that I even wanted to get to today, because we've had such a great conversation about other things. So because on the next show, I do want to get more into fast food. I'm fascinated by fast food. I'm fascinated by the culture of fast food. I want to talk to you about trends in fast food, especially now with COVID and, people's health and everything like that. So we're going to talk about that on the next show. And because I do, people are very, very passionate. I mean, when I was younger, I got in arguments with my friends about what was better, the Whopper or the Big Mac, which fries were better, Wendy's or McDonald's, or going to In-N-Out Burger out on the West Coast is this like delicacy for me. I want to talk to you more about that on the next show. But I do just want to ask you one final question before I let you go here. You talked about the chefs. And I know this might be more of a longer question, which we can cover on the next show as well. I feel like chefs I feel like they're built differently. I feel like you're very type A. I feel like they're almost eccentric on some things. I feel like you have to be wired a certain way to be a chef. My younger son, he's not a chef. He could be a chef someday. He loves to cook in the kitchen, and he's always like, very particular, and he's yelling at me. It's like with Gordon Ramsay, right? Like my son, my 11-year-old son's yelling at me like he's Gordon Ramsay, right? Is that, it might be a stereotype that I'm making, but do you sort of almost have to be built a different way, wired a certain way to be a chef?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, look, chefs again are really creative people, and I think something can be said. Look, coming from a musician, I consider myself fairly creative, but I know that for people who make a career out of creativity, you're wired a little bit differently, for better or worse. So I think with chefs, no doubt there are stereotypes out there, right? No doubt you have that stereotype of the chef with all the tattoos, who's dealt with drug issues, who is a night owl and is kind of a hard ass or whatever that might be. Those stereotypes exist kind of for a reason. And I think some of that's changing. You had the Anthony Bourdain Kitchen Confidential, which kind of gave a peek behind the scenes at what restaurants were like. And, it wasn't good. And a lot of those strains remain in the restaurant industry. And now, Me Too took a big hit on the restaurant industry because there is really, the sexism is pretty prevalent in the restaurant industry. And some heavy hitters, Mario Batali and others were taken down by that. And there's a lot of attention on this now because it needs to change. The drug problem needs to change. Chefs need to, there needs to be more of a standard living, I think. And so there's some effort out there to change that. Now, I will tell you, and we can get into it in our next conversation, but I will tell you, there's a lot of movement now, chefs going to QSR, fast casual. And part of that's because they see the mass appeal. They see the Danny Meyer doing Shake Shack and they say, well, I could become a billionaire too. But the other part of it is they want a 9 to 5. They don't want to do, they're having families. They don't want to stay out until 2 a.m. and that whole lifestyle anymore. So anyway, that's all to say that chefs have a lifestyle, and it's a lifestyle for a reason because the nature of the restaurant is late nights. You're with a bunch of, similarly rough-edged people. So you get into some stuff, whatever. But there's a light at the end of the tunnel for people who want it, which is the food industry, the restaurant industry is so diverse and vast. There are so many opportunities for chefs that if that's not your lifestyle, thankfully, you can go find an opportunity doing something else and you will be happy doing it and you can live, the more normal life you want to live.
Well, it is interesting that you say that because it's a culture, the restaurant culture, which we could talk a little bit more on the next show. It does seem to, you talk about the sexism and some of the, the drugs, and it does seem to maybe breed that a little bit because you're spending time in a space with very close proximity to people. You're working long hours. There's food. There's alcohol. There's conflict, probably just because it's a very intense environment, right? Pressure cooker, right? Or too many cooks in the kitchen. These are all analogies, right? We've heard these analogies before. So it almost does seem to breed that kind of culture a little bit. But I've always been impressed with somebody that can run a kitchen like that. You see these shows, and I'm sure it's obviously a little dramatized on TV, but it's probably close to that, I would imagine. And I find that absolutely intriguing. And you also mentioned Anthony Bourdain, and when he was alive, I loved him. I thought he was awesome.
Yeah, me too.
He just seemed like and again, I not knowing a ton about food, I know what I like, but he just seemed to know a lot about it. He was the kind of guy you just wanted to sit down with. I was always very jealous when he was on that show where he traveled around the world. Was it Parts Unknown?
Parts Unknown, yeah.
And he was sitting there. I would just love to sit down and have a drink and a meal with that guy and have talked to him. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But we can talk about more on the next show. Anyway, Same Oches, who is I want to make sure I say it correctly here, the Editorial Director, Food News Media. And Sam, thanks so much for joining us. This is part 1. On the next show, we're going to get a little bit more into some of the trends that we're seeing during COVID, what we can expect maybe post-COVID, and why are people almost getting into fistfights over fast food French fries? Who's right? Who's wrong? And why does it matter? We're going to talk a little bit more about that. We all have our favorites. So, Sam, I really want to thank you for being with us, and we'll get you on next week. We'll continue the conversation, and I hope you're ready for that fast food talk. I'm getting hungry. I kind of go for a Big Mac right now.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Brian. Looking forward to it.
Looking forward to it, and don't worry about the visual. It's fine. We see your name on there. That's all good. And I also
I'll get it fixed. Yeah,
we'll get it fixed. It's all good. And again, I want to thank mustny.com. Get your COVID masks. It's a great gift this kind of time of year. Chris Bossert, Monica Perez Bossert out in Western New York. And while we're waiting for our next show with Sam, part 2, make sure you keep eating, enjoy yourself, try not to overdo it, but in the meantime, keep an eye on life. Thanks for joining us.